because I think it's just crazy. How's it
Oh
going,
yeah.
everyone? Welcome to this live stream with Malcolm Nance. We do these occasionally. I hope more often in the future. But Malcolm, we were just discussing off air your experiences with Canada and the visa troubles. I've had my own personal visa troubles. I had to move back from the US because Trump's re-election changed my visa classifications. But you've been, yeah, it seems like it's quite a challenge for your other half as well, by the sounds of it. And with everything happening now with the
Well,
trade war and everything, like what's going on?
yeah. Well, the world out there is very different than it was a year and a half ago. And setting my family, my in-laws aside, none of them want to come to the United States anymore. My late wife was a French Canadian, and every year we have a fete, we have a memorial, fete in September, and they were like, "We're going to hold that in Montreal now." I mean, they just do not like the United States. And Donald Trump has gone out of his way to antagonize. I think Canada has 40 million people, but to antagonize those people and to endanger, it's amazing. It's like you've been living next to someone for 50 years and you've gone to birthday parties and you love them and you have wife and kids, and then the husband remarries and decides he hates you, hates your house, hates the paint color. If he had an opportunity, he'd set it on fire or do a home invasion and get rid of you. That is how the United States is treating Canada. And it's almost pathological because two countries, the first two countries Trump showed direct, open animosity to were Canada first by calling Prime Minister at that time Trudeau and essentially telling him, "We're going to annex your country. You will surrender your country to us, and it will become our 51st state." And then started publicly calling him governor, then telling everybody Canada's the 51st state. But when Trudeau had his first calls at the White House, they made it clear this was not a joke, that this was actually the president's policy. And then Trump started saying out loud in public that he was going to economically break Canada. The second call that he made was to the Prime Minister of Denmark to berate her, Mette Frederiksen, to berate her about how she wasn't going to surrender Greenland to him and that he demanded it. And the way that the reporting put it, this is in the first few days of his administration. The way the reporting put it is that the senior staff of the prime minister's office were like mortified that they were essentially giving her and Denmark a direct military threat and that the United States would just go ahead and seize Greenland. I actually, I understand you're going to be going to Canada here soon. I did an interview on for Globe Television for the Globe and Mail. That's their biggest paper in Toronto, where I had to say shocking things about Trump's threats to Canada. But when you use the word annexation, what does that mean? Trump was saying we're going to annex Canada. We're going to bring Canada as the 51st state in the United States. I mean, does that mean that suddenly they no longer belong to the English Commonwealth of Nations, that they are not under the nominal authority of King Charles, that they're going to just give up the maple leaf flag, accept the United States, all of them in one day will swear allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. And the part that really got them the most, Pyotr, was this. I said, the US Army would have to come into your country to take possession of it. And they were like, well, what are you talking about? The US Army? Why would the US Army come? I go, you think annexation is just me saying it and it happening? Your government would be run by Donald Trump. The bureau, the all of your immigration would be enforced by American ICE agents that would come into your country and would immediately expel the Indian population, the Bangladeshi population, the Haitian population of Montreal, which is huge. I said, do you even understand what you're talking about? And then the word started getting around, like, wait, are you talking that the United States would invade Canada? Well, what do you think annex means, right? When Hitler annexed the Sudetenland, right, of the Czech Republic, he annexed it by saying, I'm annexing it. And the next thing that you saw was German army forces invading that country. So, in the great scheme of things, and many Americans said the same thing, right? I had these right wing yahoos out there going, well, you said we were going to invade Canada. I said, no, the president himself said we want to annex Canada, which requires a military seizure of your country, your armed forces, your weapon, your explosive. Canada has a 75,000 man army and a 250,000 man reserve force. They're all Americans the next day. They put on U.S. Army uniforms, So this is what the threat really was.
But
When
do you
he
think
said, I'm going to annex you.
the American military would have really enacted on that? Do you really think, because that's a crazy.
I've spoken about that too extensively. It's crazy, right?
Who in their right mind would actually think, yes, we're going to launch an all-out war against our closest and most loyal of allies, let alone just pure neighbors, right? America couldn't wish for a better neighbor, right? They couldn't wish for someone more favorable, more conducive to American interests, peaceful, friendly. Like the amount of Canadians I've met through my travels in Europe in the past months, they're like, we just want to join Europe. This whole idea of the EU, I don't know how realistic it is, but like it's crazy what Trump's done in a year and a half.
Well, when you consider that Canadian waters connect to Greenland, which is part of the European Union. Therefore, by extension, you're just creating a North Atlantic branch of the European Union.
Good point. I hadn't thought of that. The maritime element, that's a good point. Okay.
Yeah, they're connected. You recall when I was in Greenland, there was a lot of talk about that, right? Like Greenland is a territory of Denmark. So, oh, by the way, and here's another excuse you can use if Canada wants to join the European Union. There is a tiny, tiny island way up near Baffin Island. And it is, for a long time, was disputed whether it was Canadian or Danish. And so, since they're two really nice groups of people, once a year, they change possession of who owns the island. The island is about the size of the bar we went to in London, right? Very tiny, right? And 5 tables. But it's an actual thing where they change control of the island every other year. And in theory, Canada could say, well, we share territory with Denmark. Therefore, we should be in the European Union. But back to your point about the U.S. Army. I had this big discussion on Canadian radio where I said, I just want you to give this a moment's thought. Of all the things that could break the U.S. Army, and when I say break, I mean where officers will openly go into rebellion, where they will flat out refuse orders. Like at the start of the American Civil War, half the officers took their guns and their uniforms and walked home to the South, and the other half took their guns and uniforms, stayed in the U.S. Army to fight those guys that ran off. But we have the 10th Mountain Division in Watertown, New York. It is about 25 kilometers from, near Kingston. There's a place there. I just drove through it the other day. It's called Thousand Miles Bridge, right? The Thousand Islands Bridge, Mille Îles, right? And it's an old, narrow, bridge from that connected Canada and the United States for a very long time. And I said, I want you to give this one moment's thought that U.S. soldiers who jump in their cars, drive the 25 clicks, and go to Kingston, or continue on to Ottawa for the weekend and drink, do you think those guys are going to go, wait a minute, you actually expect us to go to the border checkpoint at Thousand Islands and kill the nice Canadian border guards and then force our way across that bridge and literally invade Canada? You would get guys going, sorry, stupidest idea, stupidest thing I've ever heard, not doing it, not doing it. And then you would have literal mutiny in the United States Armed Forces. Some guys who are nuts, who are, civilian control of the military will say, yeah, I'll do it. But you'll have the next officer next to him going, are you fucking kidding me? We're going to go invade the Tim Hortons? This is stupid. And we do not breed people in the armed forces to be stupid. We see stupid things, but on the whole, our armed forces is a very thinking force. It's a very intelligent, educated force. Now you're asking them to implement what would arguably be the stupidest American decision in its entire history. And then, we had that, what was his name? Sean Duffy the other day, Secretary of Transportation, come out and make a stupid ass comment that the Canadians don't have a military to speak of. Are you talking about the Canadian military that lost 147 soldiers in Afghanistan fighting alongside the United States, whose special forces is considered, at a higher level than ours, who have they have this group of people in Canada, a militia force called the Rangers. The Canadian Rangers aren't Rangers like our Rangers. They're more, or the Irish Rangers. They are native tribes given weapons, equipment, and autonomy, right, to act as scouts for the regular Canadian Army, right? And this is last of the Mohicans, guys. It is literally, the Huron de Lac, in Last of the Mohicans, with Canadian built M16 style rifles. This is not something you can just say and it happens. It's an insane, mentally ill fantasy of a senile old man.
I'm just looking at some of the footage now of Sean Duffy. What I love about this is they even say on it, like the video showing Sean talking, I'm not going to call him Secretary Duffy. I think it's an insult to the position.
No, it's an insult to.
But he's there in front of the IndyCar race, which I have to say was pretty cool. I wish I'd been in DC for that. But I'm just looking at this here. It's on Fox News Sunday, and even they called him a complete goon for saying this. I didn't know much about this guy, to be honest with you. He's a reality TV star. He looks absolutely ridiculous, but
all of his experience on this planet was that he was a reality TV star. He was never a politician. And how he got and how he got appointed to the cabinet of the presidency of the United States. I mean, the man's a moron. And this is the stupidest group of people that have ever been assembled. The Secretary of Education, it was the wife of the head of Worldwide Wrestling. She's not a teacher. She has no experience. She was an admin lady at WWE, which is rife with rape, sexual exploitation, violence. They had murders within WWE. They believe that it's a corrupt criminal organization. Yeah, put her in charge. And what was her mandate? To destroy the American public education system. That literally was the platform. That's her job, is to close all American schools. It's mind-boggling how stupid the people are that, one, voted for them, because they think they're all going to go to Christian schools now and get tens of billions of dollars in Christian school money. But that's just her. I mean, look, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., in charge of Health and Human Services, is a former heroin addict. How do we know he's not still on heroin? All right, this guy was the guy who experiment on raccoon penis and pulls dead animals off the side of the road. This is mental illness in cap. If South Park had come up with, or wait, let me rephrase that. If Benny Hill had, give you something you can understand. If Benny Hill would walk into the room, right? You know that crazy character he always plays. He would still be the smartest guy in the room. These people are without a doubt the motliest collection of the biggest liars, fools, and sycophants in American history. And those who have education literally dump it out of their head when having to deal with Donald Trump. This is about money. And that's why you get dumbass statements like, well, you don't have an army to speak of. The 5,000 Canadian Rangers, right? These are tribal guides. I don't know if anybody's been to Canada, but I was just there 2 days ago. It's effing huge. And it's the size of the United States with the population of 3 cities. And they're spread out everywhere. But you go past Toronto and you start heading into Le Grand Nord, right? You quickly go from civilization to a massive coniferous forest that's the size of the entire American Midwest. And there ain't jack shit there but trees and mooses. How exactly do you think we are going to manage that? And you keep going further on, and then it's Greenland, right? It's ice communities just like Greenland. It doesn't have as deep an ice sheet, but it goes literally to the 89th parallel in the Arctic Circle. So exactly what were we going to do with this? It's crazy. And it's even crazier, by the way. I know I'm on a bit of a rant. It's crazier where this idea came from. Oh, I'm not hearing you.
You on a rant? No way.
It's never happened before, except every time.
No, never. No, I was just going to say that what you're describing makes me think a little bit like the Winter War, right? The Soviets against the Finns, when they are dealing with an environment that they have a much better understanding of. It's a much smaller force. They're incredibly well trained, underestimated by their opponent. And obviously the circumstances are slightly different, but sort of based on that terrainal difference there and the environment that they're operating in, I think is quite an interesting analogy. But go on, you had one last comment, but I do want to pivot to Iran.
Yeah. Well, one, let me talk about Prime Minister Carney's statements.
Well, I think Prime Minister Carney is brilliant.
He is brilliant.
I think he's doing fantastic work.
He was the chairman of your Bank of England's central bank. I mean, you got to go get a Canadian to run your money is brilliant. Okay. And he made it eminently clear. The whole, the dynamic of what happened with Canada was simple. Trump tried to do to Canada what he tried to do to Zelensky. When Zelensky was desperate for weapons, he brought him in. They supposedly were supposed to have this agreement. And Zelensky, he walked into a meeting and Trump and Vance said this, right? We're going to sell you weapons using European Union money. But before we do that, you're going to agree to give us 50% of all your country's natural resources. That's what that bait and switch happened. They tried it on Canada. They tried that very act on Canada. The first thing was Canada could not sell anything to any third party if they had signed this agreement, to any third party nation without America's authorization. Right? It was, they could not sell, and they were saying things like you couldn't sell wood to China. You couldn't, export your oil from, Manitoba and Alberta to any other country. The United States gets first right of refusal on your entire fucking country's industries. Right? That was number one. The kicker is that they had been negotiating an actual deal. And when the deal was supposedly done, the trade negotiators came in to sign the deal. They got to the meeting and they found out a completely different set of deals, demands were being made by the United States. That was the first one, right? The United States could not do, or Canada could not pursue independent trade deals without America's authorization. The second one, they had to eliminate French language rules. My do not disturb was not on.
Well, you said something very good. Well,
I just have to
did
put
say
my.
things. That's all right. You take a moment. You insulted something about the French, and you've triggered a security issue. So clearly, they want to silence you. The French Canadians.
It was a call from Montreal.
There you go.
You can tell the mayor's like, qu'est-ce qui se passe? But
Go
this
on.
whole thing of getting rid of the French language in all dealings with the United States. I mean, it's insane. It's like calling Mexico and saying, stop speaking Spanish in Mexico. Your ATMs must all be in English, right? Here's another one. They wanted to eliminate Canadian cultural content quotas. Canada is a very liberal country. And one of the things they do is they had inclusion in their TV commercials. And the Indian guy with a French Canadian wife, or they would have a Haitian guy with a woman from Manitoba, a First Nations person. And they wanted that eliminated. Canada must get rid of anything that moderates its content, which is insane. Heavy vehicles built by US companies, Ford, GM plants that are in tariff must have tariff relief. No taxes on anything, right? That the Americans buy. Open up procurement. This is a great one. Canada must allow any bids on any contracts to be authorized to allow American companies a shot at those contracts. So, in other words, they're essentially, as I keep going on, they essentially are saying Canada has all the authority of a US state, and that the United States government is taking control of Canada's policy, industry, and things. Oh, here's another one. Canada must stop using its pesticide policy and adopt American government pesticide policy, which means GMOs, chemicals on everything. Canada has pretty much organic food in everywhere. Remember, there's only 42 million Canadians. There's 350 million Americans. And they wanted them to get rid of that. They wanted U.S. property rules extended on drug patents. In other words, big pharma would take over the Canadian drug industry, America's big pharma. It's crazy. It's like me coming to England and going, Windsor Castle must take down all of its Union Jacks and fly the American flag. Right? It's just fucking crazy.
Oh, we've had conversations about that here, though. We've had conversations about Brexit, EU, American chicken. It was mainly about chlorinated chicken. Would we get American-style chicken in British supermarkets? A bit like when we left the European Union, it was all about bananas. So it's either about bananas or it's about chicken, or maybe something else. There's another food in there probably somewhere.
It was supposed to be about fish, British fisheries.
Oh no,
right? Fishing protections.
Well, I was trying to make a silly joke, but you had to be serious about it.
Wait. Bananas and what?
No, so when the British government, when we left the EU,
and chicken,
Boris Johnson's big emphasis was that the curvature of bananas would change. The European Union wanted to control how curvy our bananas were. That was his argument, that sort of the European Union is very bureaucratic. It's obviously superficial or highly inflated, but yeah, look, I mean, the imposition of America's sort of Trump's America on Canada, I think, is insulting. I just think that the economic warfare that you're seeing now with Canada is just a reflection of what he's doing everywhere now. He seems to have gone with Iran, and he's gone full circle.
But these quote unquote negotiations, they always intended to do this. This literally would neuter Canada as a sovereign nation. And Carney was effing furious. And you remember his speech that he gave at the G7, where he said, the
Middle power.
fantasy that the world is normal, and that we are going to be dealing with the United States the way it was, the status quo. That's over and done with. Then he made his speech last Friday, where he essentially said, our dealings with the United States are finished. The United States now will have to get in line like every other fucking country in the world and go out and start acting like another independent nation. You will bid, no preferences. Now, I'm in New York State. My electricity went up 30% last year because of Donald Trump's 51st state comments. The Canadians slowly started taking away subsidies and were increasing the price of electricity. 150 million Americans out of 350 get electricity from Canada, right? And then Trump comes back and makes this ridiculous comment yesterday. He's going to change the name of the Gulf of Ontario to the Gulf of America.
Again.
You know, just
another one. I hadn't heard about
this. Isn't the last day.
Oh,
so, of course, you get a thinking, intellectual prime minister like Carney, and his message was clear. This is going to hurt. Cutting ties with the United States is going to hurt. We are now going to export east and west and not south. Fuck the United States. And you know what? We deserve it. It's going to hurt.
Well, I remember when they started doing that as early as, I think it was June of last year. You really began to see quietly but clear signs that the Canadians were decoupling, or at least de-risking, disconnecting energy, and a lot of the northern states of the US were really beginning to feel, because the overlap between the energy supply chains, all that sort of stuff, access to certain raw minerals and trade was so assumed, right? It's a porous border. It's not exactly a closed border. But they really began to feel the trans-border limits on energy supply, especially during the winter. I think you saw a notable increase in that. But as a sort of bit of a pivot there, Malcolm, because I think a lot of people are curious about your thoughts on Iran, and I know you talk about it a lot every day. But we've had lots of guests on as well, and I cover it myself daily. And I just think that what we're seeing is just a return to what was originally not the original part of this war at the beginning, but maximum pressure, or even before that under the Obama administration, right? Use of financial levers and maximum economic pressure, or D-Day now, to get behavioral change by Iran. And it's not going to happen. Why do they think it's going
to happen? Pyotr, I've said this before. This administration lives in a fantasy bubble of its own creation. When they won that election the second time, Trump and all of his team sat there smoking cigars, drinking cognac, brandy or bourbon, and congratulating themselves, and now saying, this is it. This is the 4 years where we are masters of the universe. The American people have shown us that they have given us their faith over the black chick, and that now we are going to be able to do the simplest words are this: any fucking thing we want. And while they're sitting around, they are creating this image of what their world looks like. And they're using Karl Rove's old dictum of, we're going to create our own reality, and you are going to be forced to live in it. And what's happening here, I mean, observe, when we did Operation, Midnight Hammer, gay porn is sounding operation ever.
I like these names.
Oh my God,
Operation
Midnight Hammer, Epic Fury,
Epic Failure.
What was the one in Venezuela? Let me tell you, it's actually, it's all ridiculous. But they live in this fantasy bubble where and this is serious, if we say it, it will manifest itself. Okay,
God, this is listening to a yoga instructor.
Yeah, well, it's like they read that book, The Secret, right? Write yourself $1 million check, keep it in your top desk drawer, and $1 million would come to you. This is the bizarrest thing in the world. I will tell you the one thing that is not happening that has happened throughout every other administration in American history. There is no policy in this government other than inflict pain on people we hate, right? Abuse and dispose of immigrants. And technically, and this is one of the things I was told by an immigration lawyer, they are not trying to limit immigration into the United States. They are trying to eliminate immigration in the United States. And the only group that has been authorized to come to the United States in the last year and a half are white South Afrikaners. That's it. They brought in, I think, some crazy number, like 4,000 now. Haitians, they want 250,000 Haitians to go, not go home. They're shipping them to weird ass fucking places. They've taken hundreds, I'm not joking, to Juba, South Sudan. And they dump them there, and they're being held in jails as part of cash agreements with the US governments. And they're saying they're criminals because they entered the United States illegally or they overstayed a visa. This is the most hateful, racist thing that has happened since, to be honest, since the Indian Scalp Act of 1749, which is where they were actually scalping people for money. The U.S. government was paying colonists to scalp Indians. This is the same thing, only with your status as a human being. And most of these people, they're not going back to Mexico. They're not going back to Haiti. They're being dumped in El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, weird ass places, Uganda and South Sudan, not Ethiopia, Somalia. Somebody explain this to me and how no one has gone to prison for this, because none of this is a policy. It's an operation to harm people. And they're doing it for the pleasure, quite honestly, of the white men that voted him in. Trump got 7 out of 10 white male votes. He got 5 out of, 5.5 of the white woman vote out of 10. And he said, I will deport 19 million people out of this country so that you don't have to see an ATM that allows you to choose Spanish or English. Right? That lie, he said that Haitians were eating cats and dogs, when in fact the Haitians in that town, Springfield, Ohio, were skilled, educated workers who were brought in that saved that city. That city was a ruin. Imagine the worst, most decrepit neighborhood in England, and then bring in an entire population that buys every house with either cash or bank loans, and then renovates the entire city to the point where cafes are starting to come in, other businesses are coming. 4 Catholic churches out of 5 were going to close down and be sold, and the Haitians are all Catholic. So all 5 churches had a massive revival, and Trump is out there saying they're eating dogs and cats. And now every one of those people is going to be deported from the United States. Oh, by the way, and they were all here legally. He doesn't care. He hates Black people. He hates brown people. He hates anyone who is not a white American male or who can pass for one. And so
he hates us as well, I think.
The point is, this rolls into how he treats the world and why Iran is getting this. But he lives in a fantasy bubble where if he says, I'm doing an economic war on Iran, bro, I'm 64 years old. Since I was 18, there have been 100% sanctions on Iran. The first person to ever lift those sanctions was Donald Trump in March. Do you remember that, when he lifted the sanctions on Iranian oil because his oil billionaire buddies came back and said, hey, man, you're stealing our oil. We need that oil back. And then he lifted sanctions on the Iranians exporting oil. It's mental illness parading as foreign policy, but it's really about his money and the money of his friends. He had a fantasy that after Venezuela, he didn't take Venezuela. He got rid of one guy. One guy. The same regime machine is still sitting there of the Maduro followers. He just bought into it to take Venezuela's oil. He got this impression that Iran was going to collapse as fast as Venezuela. And Benjamin Netanyahu put that into his head. I've been working in that region for 40 years. I fought the Iranians in direct combat in the 1980s. I've been through their minefields at sea. I've gone through the Strait of Hormuz a dozen or more times. And you look to the right and you're like, well, that's Iran. They could beat our ass right now. For Donald Trump, that did not matter. His world he created in his head and his followers all are going along with him. As far as they're concerned, that's the world that he's occupying. Now he got it back into his head that we can break them economically. Someone has been telling Trump Iran is so destitute that the government's on the verge of collapse. The people are on the verge of rebellion. People are starving in the streets. And because of the U.S. Navy blockade, that Iran is going to collapse and crumble at any minute now, which is insane. It's insanity to even imagine that. Iran has 7 nations around it, not the United Arab Emirates, Pakistan. Let's start where all the big money's coming from, right? Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Russia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, and Iraq. They all physically contact through the sea, through the Caspian Sea. Iran, do you think those guys are all going to go, yeah, Donald Trump told us not to sell you fucking potato chips. Therefore, we're going to stop doing business with you. Are you shitting me? This isn't even the gray market. This is a white market. Every one of those countries is going to go, holy shit, we can now raise our prices by 10%. And Iran's going to buy everything we have. The only thing United Arab Emirates cut off in sales from Iran was gold. That was the #1 export from the United Arab Emirates to Iran. Pakistani gold sellers in fucking Karachi and Baluchistan are going to be like, yes, right? This is insane to think that we are going, dude, this is not the siege of Jerusalem, okay? You don't have 100,000 man army and Donald Trump's not fucking Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, okay? He is not cutting off every bit of water, food, and stuff there. You cannot do a siege with air forces and with a ironically, openly gay man who's married, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who has 2 adopted kids, and say, we're going to beat Iran at their own cultural war with this, and think that you're going to win. Iran has 100 trading partners. Virtually all of them now see an opportunity to make more money. And you know who's making the most money? China, Russia. Now the Silk Road, the great, road that China is building that Marco Polo and everybody else has been on. Now it's going to get real traffic. Can't come by sea. It's got to come by vehicle. So 18-wheelers are going to be, I would be investing in Chinese 18-wheel transport companies if I was going to do anything. They're the new Silk Road is going to spring up out of Trump's stupidity.
You really think it's going to go that far? Now, before you answer that, I want to be more specific, because one of the things that's been interesting to me is the actual route itself. So I had this conversation with Treated Parsi earlier today. Oh, yeah. And one of the things I showed him was this map. So this is the alternative route proposed, because I'm sure you've seen on CNN.
Of course.
They're all talking about this temporary route through the strait, which kind of is confusing, because how much different could it get? It's not exactly a big stretch of water. But right now, what we look like is this is the proposed route. Now, I'm kind of curious, your military experience and having been firsthand there, what is the IRGC restricted area. Why would they do that? But second, when we keep in mind that this is the alternative route proposed, but this one is what was originally being suggested, right? So this is what the Omanis suggested. This is the original one, guys, when the water's just free for everyone to use, normal world. And this is the Iranian one originally. So basically, what we've got is the Iranian proposal largely completely agreed with. So,
well, that we've been looking at for months. That's what we call the IRGC TSS, the RevGuard traffic separation scheme. When they originally started that, if you look at the Kishem Island, that blue and yellow route on the upper left there, it initially went over Larak Island. That was the exit way. And the reason that they were routing ships between Kishem Island, Larak Island, and Hormuz Island was so that they could physically look at you, right? And the IRGC said, if you don't start using the scheme, we're just going to sink you. So a lot of companies started using that scheme to appease the IRGC. The lower route, which comes up and below Larak Island, was the entryway. And they don't care what ships enter. They just want to be able to literally, like a toll booth, check who you are and check physically what ship you are, who's the master, check your papers. And, technically, they're turning it into a toll booth.
But where would the tolls go, Malcolm? Would it go on this side? Or like how far out of the strait?
This scheme has been going since mid-March. This has been in effect. All right. The Iranians mined the old traffic separation scheme, which is that upper box. You see the upper box of those two boxes? That's where the old original TSS was. That lower box is the Omani U.S. Navy Operation Freedom traffic separation scheme, which hugs very close to the coast of the Musandam Peninsula. You get within, right, the green one. You see the green arch down there? That's the U.S. Navy's scheme. And by the way, the U.S. Navy was not escorting anybody. I have been on escorts in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. Navy would put a warship out on the east side in the North Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Oman, and they would give you these data points to navigate through, and they would claim they would provide air defense in case the Iranians shoot a missile. Well, that's not come to pass. We just had a tanker that was hit 3 days ago, there at the outside end near Ashisha, Oman. There's a place there called Ashisha. And it got hit by an IRGC anti-ship missile or a drone. But if you turn right from Ashisha and look 21 nautical miles, you are looking at Sirik, Iranian RevGuard tunnel complex, where they have hundreds of missiles, sea mines, and all sorts of stuff. So, it's so narrow and so defined. If the Omanis and the Iranians can come up with a scheme that allows them to charge, you got to remember, the Iranians started charging in March $2 million. That was your toll for maintenance to go through the Strait of Hormuz to come out, carrying a load.
But wasn't there an interruption to that? The Iranians stopped earning money at one point, didn't they? There was a
no.
The Iranians are still earning at this point, but I thought the
Iranians are still charging. No, Trump said that they were going to stop when the MOU was signed, and we are 45 days past the end. 45 days of phase 2 combat. It only lasted, the MOU only lasted what, 60 days? Not even 60 days.
No, not even 60.
It took 60 days to negotiate it. But Trump screwed that up. And then, don't you remember, the first time this was ever mentioned was in late March. And Trump's first thought when the Iranians said, we're charging $2 million a ship, back in March, Trump said, we should be going halves on this. I think that we should charge 20%. And the Iranians put that aside, right? Everybody laughed at it, charged 20%. Then Trump came back in July and said it again. We are blockading. So we should charge everyone 20% of the value of their cargo for our effort at blockading Iran. And this was such a stupid comment that it actually got the Iranians to go back with the Omanis and started negotiating a fee based on the percentage of cargo, of the value of the cargo. Trump put that into the discussion, not the Iranians or the Omanis. And now, is it going to be 7% or 3%? Well, the Iranians initially were charging a flat fee of $2 million on a super tanker worth a $500 million with oil, right? And $100 million for the tanker. 7% could be as much as 40 million bucks. Not 40 million, but much more than that, much more than 2 million. 14 million. Trump put this in the air. So whatever is negotiated with the Iranians and the Omanis, what you are about to see is the Strait of Hormuz is about to become the Bosphorus Straits, which is between Istanbul.
Fully gatekept by Iran, but Iran is Turkey.
It's going to be managed by Iran and Oman, the Persian Gulf Straits Authority, which they made up back in March and April. But they are also going to authorize, and the Omanis, I think, in the end, are going to agree to this. No warships.
But how much agency do the Omanis really have, Malcolm? Let's be honest.
It's their waters.
It's their waters, but they don't have any ability to influence Iran if Iran decides they want to change something. Or you think the Iranians wouldn't do that?
No, look. We've talked about this before, right? This part of the world, the way that they do business is the way they do business in a camel souk. They all sell camels, right? They all, no, I'm not joking. In Liwa, down in southern United Arab Emirates, every year they have the great camel beauty contest.
They do. It's just,
right? But my point is this: culturally, they all understand how to buy and sell things through them that is millennia old, right? So when the Omanis say, listen, we're ready to agree to this. Early on, the Omanis were actually, we're saying, no, we're not going to have this discussion. That was back in April. We're not going to be charging any fees. It's got to go back to the way it was. Then when they sat down with a pencil and figured out that the Omanis could earn as much as $50 billion per year, it would become the number one moneymaker other than oil and bunkering of oil in Oman. All you have to do is say yes, and you suddenly get this income. The Omanis and the Iranians are not going to be fighting each other, even though the Iranians have tapped on some of their oil refineries to remind them not to deal with the Americans. When it gets down to it, it's going to be an Omani or Iranian deal. And there's not a damn thing Trump can do about it because Iran has the ability to enforce this. Now, here's the big kicker. The Iranians are insisting the Persian Gulf will not allow any warships that are not from the nations of the Gulf to transit into the Persian Gulf. No warships, which will essentially make it like the Bosphorus, which is why the Russian Black Sea Fleet had to be built in the Black Sea. It can't transit through there because Turkey has cannons on both sides that can stop them. Iran has the capacity to sink ships. And now that we're in ceasefire, they're going to be sharpening that dagger. And they can make it very painful for anyone that decides they want to exercise freedom of navigation. If Oman agrees to this, deal is over. The U.S. Navy's involvement. I lived in Bahrain. I lived in the United Arab Emirates. I sailed ships all the way from, pretty much Qasr all the way out to the Indian Ocean multiple times. I've been off every Iranian island pretty much. We will be shut out, and it will be a diplomatic fait accompli. Oman will agree to this because it just gets Iran off its back, and it's such a simple ask. But it is not a free passage waterway. It is half Iranian, half Omani. Surprise.
No, I know. I just wonder how much agency they have, because Oman's not exactly a
That's
military
okay.
power, so they largely just have to sort of go along with it. But
If
I
I'm
guess
firing ballistic missiles like the Houthis yesterday, fired a ballistic missile, a DF-21 style ballistic missile at a Saudi VLCC, very large crude carrier that was 64 nautical miles northwest of Yanbu yesterday, and fucking hit it. 1,076 kilometers is how far that missile flew. Now, if I have a narrow passageway that's 21 miles wide, right? About 35 kilometers, I can hit anything through there. The Iranians have the ability to stop anybody who wants to get through there. And as the longer this ceasefire goes, the more their capacity to stop ships is going to be rebuilt. They don't need a navy for it. The Ukrainians have wiped out the Russian Navy in the Black Sea, and they don't have a navy, right? The Iranians don't need a navy either, which Trump keeps bragging about.
I think Putin's getting desperate. He might be resorting to more extreme methods like tactical nukes. I think there was an article even in Bloomberg about that. But
That's crazy.
um,
That would be crazy desperation.
well, I still think it's unlikely. But the other thing about Iran that I was quite curious for your thoughts was the types of naval mines. Again, sort of like I thought this was quite well for someone who has the limited understanding of something specific as mines, compared to yourself, Malcolm. Like, can you take us through sort of what do you estimate is the quantity of mines in the strait? How many have been demined, if any at all? How many more are being added? And sort of like, what's the difference between these types? And like, do they make a difference, or it doesn't really matter in the big grand scheme of everything you've just been saying?
Oh, I mean, the number is anywhere between 0 and 10,000, right? I mean, the way mines actually control terrain is simply this. Now, by the way, the illustration that you have shows several different types of mines, but mainly the one everybody thinks of is what we call the moored mine. That's the one that's big,
Right.
round, it's got spiky horns, it rolls off a ship on a tray. The little bottom weight goes to the bottom and a chain spools it out, and the mine will hover at a certain depth. Right? Those are old World War II style mines. The Iranians have loads of those. And interestingly enough, those aren't the ones that do the most damage. They're the ones that are just more visually acceptable to us. The kind of mines that are the worst are torpedo mines, where you lay a device on the seabed and it sits there and it listens to the ships going over it. And it might be programmed to listen for a ship with one screw, right, which is a small vessel of a certain harmonic, which they've had intelligence on that, or one with two screws and gas turbine engines. And or it may just count the number of ships that goes by, and it may be programmed to launch on ship number 17. And then ship number 17 goes by, the torpedo unencapsulates and it floats up, and then its propellers come on and it chases the ship and blows up the ship. But it lays on the seabed. Another type is called a bottom mine. A bottom mine lays on the seabed. It can be there for long periods of time. It could be the same thing. You could program it. Some of them have counters that go up to 999, right? Which means you can allow 998 ships to pass before it detonates. And even worse, at the longer it sits on the bottom, it will have paint and could have coatings that will encourage crustaceans to grow on it, so that visual inspection of this will be much harder to see, right? And often they're made out of high density plastics or metals that are non-magnetic, that are hard for minesweepers to come and find. Full disclosure, I'm going to show you a photograph. If you take that and bring us back to the regular screen, I'm going to show you a photograph of how deep my history with mine warfare in the Persian Gulf is. If I can reverse this, I don't know if I can reverse this image, but I would have to send it to you.
Send it to me and I can
I'll
post it.
send it to you. I
No, just send it to
have,
me. We'll bring it up.
it's
Don't
a
worry.
map. It's a map of me, young Malcolm, good looking with a big cheesy smile, age 24, I think, no, 25, with a map of every Iraqi mine laid in the Persian Gulf. 2,000 mines were laid. But for the first 4 months of Operation Desert Shield, I was on the command ship in Manama, Bahrain, and I had an intelligence staff that did not believe the Iraqis were laying mines. And I was like, mine laying, hundreds. I thought hundreds. Turns out we were off by 1,000 on our estimation of how many they had
Wow.
laid. So the Iranians, if they say, we know we found one mine in the Persian Gulf, that's it. That's all you need is the threat of mines to tell you that they're there. Iran has a great a rocket. It's a battlefield rocket. It shoots a rocket out into the Persian Gulf. I think its range is 40 kilometers, which is enough to hit most of the southern Persian Gulf. And what it is a mine that's launched by a rocket. It goes out, it sinks, and then it hovers, using, ballast technology to allow it to sit at a certain depth. And it also will count ships or look for a magnetic signature, and then it will explode or it will launch a torpedo that will come and chase you. So the Iranians don't need boats to put mines into the Persian Gulf. Another full disclosure, I struck a mine when I was on the USS Tripoli, one of those big, round, spiky horn mines. The Iraqi called them Lugum 145, LGM 145 mine, 145 kilograms of explosives. It took our 20,000-ton ship, lifted it 2 meters in the air, and dropped it. It is not pleasant to hit a mine. And then soon after, another one of our ships, USS Princeton, hit a mine within an hour, bottom mine that created a giant gas bubble that critically damaged that ship. The point is, mines can be there, but if they're here, that's where they're most effective. And if I were
So
the Iranians, I'd just lay one a night, and I'd let it float so that you could see it, so that you would imagine there's 100 in there.
So I'm going to share. I'm going to share my whole screen, but I do have this photo. So this is we met for a drink. When was this? I think it was in
I was in
July.
London in
June.
no,
2
June.
months.
Yeah. I went
Yeah.
I was at that Bletchley Park event.
Yeah.
That was super fun. That's why I have that. I'm clean shaven and I had my military haircut because
So there's another one,
it
I
was
think.
1940s
Oh, there you go.
weekend.
There's a better one. Yeah, there you
Yeah,
go. That's good. We had a good.
that was a grand old time.
Yeah, I was late, but I was cycling across the whole of London to get there in time.
Oof.
But yeah, so we
That's
got to
okay.
hang out in person, everyone, which is quite fun. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Of course, mine to me seem very psychological, right? It's just the fear of something. But I mean, you and I haven't spoken for a bit of time, but in that time, a lot has a lot always happens. But simply, how much do you think that this has really changed the psyche for Iran longer term, like their strategic foresight, not just strategy in the more
Oh,
grand strategy, because to me, like their entire calculus has changed, right? They all now obviously it's more complicated, but simply what I'm for argument's sake, right? They used to put a lot of emphasis on nuclear bomb as primary deterrent. But now it's
mhm.
just geography. The Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el Mandeb, any of these supply chain choke points are clearly a disproportionate factor to them now. Like it must be
Yeah.
worse, right?
It's just a matter of geography now. Well, first off, the United States in this war, straight up, we have made Iran a superpower. We've made it a regional superpower, and we've technically created the fourth largest power on the planet. So, here's what the Iran war has shown. The United States has very critical limits in one, the most important weapon of them all, patience. The United States has no strategic patience after Iraq and Afghanistan. Zero. right? Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. We want to go back to Desert Storm style wars, right? Where we just win in a matter of days and then we come back and we go home, right? Desert Storm took 6 months to move 500,000 men to the other side of the planet, flying 24/7, but created a coalition of dozens of nations. We got the goddamn Syrian army from Hafiz al Assad to come and join us alongside the Egyptian army to invade Iraq, to invade Kuwait, to liberate Kuwait. We don't have that patience anymore. We have a nation, again, we're being led by some of the stupidest people on the planet. They want instant satisfaction. They want instant gratification. Trump, the fantasy, I don't know who it was that talked to him, got it into his head that he would own Iran's global oil supply. He would own the world's oil supply at the end of this. He would knock down Iran. Iran would become a vassal state of the United States. The IRGC would poof, magically disappear after the United States dropped a few thousand bombs. The people would rise up and they would all want freaking, McDonald's and Chuck E. Cheese's and things like that. It's a fantasy. And he thought he would control the Strait of Hormuz and that he would then be a power block against. Technically, he wanted to go back to 1952 and get rid of the IRGC version of Mossadegh. Guess what's happening now? That the same thing that happened then. The first thing the British did when we overthrew Mossadegh was when we were trying to put pressure on him after he nationalized Iran's oil. They did a naval blockade of Iran. 1951, 1952. Didn't work. It's not going to work now. But Trump had this fantasy that he was going to rule Iran, and that he would be the kingmaker, kingbreaker of oil in this world. So, I don't know how Iran, or how Trump is going to get out of this, but the Iranians they have shown him the limits of American power.
Well, I think there's another element, though, Malcolm, which is the Lebanon. I don't touch on Lebanon that often because there's just so much going on with Iran and the US directly. But it's clear to me that the Lebanon equation is a sticking point for Tehran, right? They're not going to agree on shit until Lebanon is resolved. But the Israelis aren't going to do shit because Trump has no power over them unless he cuts funding. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. But at the same time, obviously the regional instability, a conflict, or whatever, Israel's operations in Lebanon, we're seeing, I kind of wanted to go into this a little bit with you, is Israel and Turkey. We've got a potential conflict between these two now, which would be insane.
I did a whole show on my Black Man Spy podcast on that, which is, I have two regional experts. I did another hour on Mario Nawafal's show. This is insane. I mean, guys, this Israel-Turkey thing, which, by the way, Israel and Turkey had really cordial relations 10, 15 years ago. Israelis could go to Turkey and could go down to the southern beaches of Turkey and be unmolested. Nobody bothered them. Israel was selling a lot of equipment, doing a lot of trade there. I believe they still have $10 billion worth of trade going back forth between Israel and Turkey. It is this government, the Netanyahu government, with Ben Gvir and the Minister of Defense, Israel Katz. They're out of their minds. I mean, they are running around. I said this whole thing about masters of the universe, having an attitude that they are going to be masters of the universe. The Israelis have that now, too. They think that they've defeated Iran by getting rid of its nuclear program, working with Trump to get rid of its nuclear program. And they have enunciated a strategy where they will neuter every Arab or Muslim state that has any capacity to threaten them. And they know Saudi Arabia is Trump's bait, and they think they're going to neutralize them by the Abraham Accords. Saudi Arabia opening and naturalizing naturalizing relationships with Israel, opening an embassy in Jerusalem. Never going to fucking happen. All right. As Mohammed bin Salman himself hinted to, they're going to assassinate him if they do that. That is not happening. He is one suicide bomber away from not being the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia could quickly become the Islamic Republic of Saudi Arabia if he were to suddenly, become a vassal state of the United States and Israel. Yikes. So, but Israel feels that they've got them neutralized and they can, negotiate with them. Now they've turned their eyes towards Turkey. Turkey is a very big country. They have a massive army, much, much bigger than the Israelis, millions. And their technology, their tech is now becoming world class. And, by the Turks, of course, they have that buffer zone along northern Syria where they backed a lot of these Islamic fundamentalist groups that Saudi Arabia funded, like the Harakat al-Tahrir al-Sham, which was essentially an Al-Qaeda offshoot. They were given anti-tank missiles by Saudi Arabia. All of those came through Turkey. They allowed them to organize in Turkey. Turkey conducted, migrant warfare against Europe by letting 1 million Syrians transit by selling them rubber boats and life vests over to Greece to destabilize Greece. Turkey is a big player in that region, but Israel, out of nowhere, has decided that the Turks getting ready to operate at Abu ad-Duhur Air Base, which is southwest of Aleppo, was just a step too far. They couldn't allow it. And Israel somehow feels that by Turkey becoming more friendly with the government of Syria, which is now stabilizing the country, which is not, on a rampage to massacre Kurds, which is a big thing amongst the Turks, right? That Israel now sees them as a direct threat because they have forces in Syria and we're going to come south of Aleppo and use that Syrian training base, Abu ad-Duhur. That's what it was. It was like an Air Force training base. And the Syrian Air Force got into the air for the first time in these 1950, 1960 era jets, the Su-22 fitter, MiG-23 floggers, and like 4 of them. And the Israelis went nuts. And their mindset is no one can have an Air Force if we don't authorize it.
But can we notice a common theme here, Malcolm, which is obviously we've had this Mecca agreement signed, which that's something else I want to get your take on, but I just want to share a couple of other things, which is
it's important.
On the Mecca agreement, look, is it a bit of a paper tiger? Is it a lot of talk and not much action? Because the day after it was signed, the Houthis launched strikes on Saudi Arabia, and neither Pakistan nor Turkey did anything. So their NATO equivalent of Article 5 isn't really following through. It's more should be considered an attack on one. That's one. But second, look, BTS and the overthrow of Assad was a remarkable change in the balance of power down there. But, al-Sharaa hasn't come round to being an extremist yet, and the multiculturalism, ethnicity, whatever, of Syria seems to be improving. I'm not going to get too carried away, but things do look positive there, and the sanctions relief by the US, ironically, on Syria is interesting. Anyway, the point is, with all of that, Israel is getting more and more, I think, antagonistic, or it looks more and more like the antagonizer in a way that you might not have said a couple of years ago, especially obviously pre-October 7th. But now you've got this shift in the balance of power. You've got this new alliance emerging. You've got restorations of countries post-conflicts that have lasted upwards of a decade, right? It's a lot of things are happening simultaneously. And the concern I have is that if you get into some situation where the Pakistanis do think, oh, we're going to come to the support of our Turkish allies, suddenly we've got 2 nuclear capable countries on opposing sides of a hypothetical conflict. Is this a scenario that is too extreme to you, or is that a very possible one? Like, I know there's a lot that I said, but like...
I know, but first I want to touch on what these Israeli ministers have been saying towards Turkey. Ben-Gvir made a comment that Turkey is not to take one more step towards Israel. People are like, dude, it's like 400 miles
They haven't
from the
moved.
Turkish border, but the Israelis see Syria as a flat billiard table with nothing in between the Golan Heights and the Turkish border. Syrian people don't exist for them. City of Damascus means nothing to them. There is no military capability that they can't handle. That's their mindset. So when they look down the Golan Heights, right, out of Quneitra, right, the part of the Golan they took in the '67 war, when they look out of Quneitra, they don't see the plains of Damascus. They see southern Turkey off on the horizon. That's the way that they're thinking now. And that any Turkish military presence which moves into that is now a threat to Israel. And that's a bizarre mindset to have. I mean, it's the sort of thing you might want to do in defense planning, but you don't say, okay, we're going to now posture our forces for war with Turkey. And then I think it was Defense Minister Kat said that, yeah, there you go.
No, I just think it's some context of use, right? That's not exactly a bought, right? It's I hate Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, I think, are two of the most unpleasant people alive today. But anyway,
of course, yeah,
please,
that's for sure. But what I was saying though is that they were saying that these attacks that they did using aircraft on the airbase Abu ad-Duhur, the Turks were prepared to engage the Israelis because they do not like. They thought the Israelis weren't going to Abu ad-Duhur. They were going to pull these orbits over Aleppo and might penetrate their airspace. And you might remember that famous incident about 5 years ago where I thought it was a MiG-29, but I think it was an Su-27. Russian Air Force penetrated Turkey's airspace twice. The second time they did it, the Turks shot them down, right? This could quickly go to an incident if Israel starts viewing Turkey as an enemy and not a regional opponent or a regional challenger. Worse is the attitude that they had towards that attack. Netanyahu came out the next day and said, let this be a warning to them, right? That this is how we're going to be doing things. You establish an airbase there, you have Turkish liaison officers, whatever you want to do, we're going to bomb you. That attitude is the Israelis now have postured themselves as only having a hammer. They don't have diplomacy. They want to be a pariah state. They're going to do what they want to do, when they want to do it, how they want to do it. The world be damned. And that could lead to a horribly bad miscalculation.
Well, just on the Russia Turkish point, I'm showing an image here because I think it's fascinating. I also think it's a moment which is so when we talk about NATO response to Russian incursions, right? Putin's probes, provocations in the Baltics, in Romania, Germany, the attempted sabotage attack on Leipzig a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
These sorts of things, Malcolm. You know, a lot of people we talk to, a lot of viewers who I'm sure are supporters of yours as well, emphasize do what Turkey did. Because what did Russia do? What did the Kremlin do? They didn't do anything. When the Turks shot down their Su-24s, as I think you rightly guessed, it was a strong condemnation. They became very British, wrote a very stern English letter, right? But that was it, right? So maybe that's what the Latvians, the Estonians, whoever it is, should be doing. My concern with the Turkish-Israeli dynamic here is, is Turkey going to somehow activate Article 4? NATO consultation? What happens to NATO in this regard?
Yeah, we had that discussion. What happens if Israel attacks Turkey? It was Ben-Gvir, if I'm not mistaken, who made the comment that Syria isn't Turkey. Syrian bases, Turkish troops in Syria, that's not Turkey. Therefore, that won't initiate NATO Article 5 if Turkish troops are killed by the Israelis in northern Syria. He also said northern Cyprus, right? The land Turkey invaded in 1974. Northern Cyprus is not Turkey either. Those two threats If you wanted Turkey to have to completely change their defense posture and start viewing their defensive posture as looking south now as its number one priority, not towards Greece, the way it's been forever, right? Since the Ottoman Empire, since it was Constantinople. Now their attitude is, oh, Israel's the threat. We see. You could not have done a more harmful thing other than to attack them. These Israeli threats against Turkey are mind-boggling. They're insane. Just
But
simply
Turkey's,
insane.
what's your experience with Turkey's military? Because it's the second largest standing force in NATO.
Yep.
They're very well trained. They did that recent. They had the incursion into Syria in October 2019. They're very combat ready and hardened, and they're pretty patriotic, right? It's not like they're
Yeah.
fighting with half-heartedness here. So, from your experience, like, what would that actually look like? Would we actually see a ground?
Well, it
Or would
would
it be
be a very, I mean, it just depends on which side the United States comes in on. If they were to attack Turkey, Turkey would absolutely invoke NATO Article 5 because that's what NATO Article 5 is for. They're a member of NATO. There's U.S. forces in Turkey. Surprise, a lot of people don't remember that Incirlik Air Base is a U.S. air base with thousands of U.S. airmen and aircraft that go in and out of Turkey. So it would have to be Israel becoming, pulling a full Trump, right? Mental illness as foreign policy and losing their mind and attacking that country. That is a massive country. And they have enough resources to make Israel pay. I mean, to where they're an air-ground battle, air-land battle that would ensue. It's mind-boggling to think about it. But this is also another reason why, Turkey has signed this Mecca agreement, because the Mecca agreement essentially creates what I call MATO, M-A-T-O, not NATO, N-A-T-O, MATO, M-A-T-O, the Mecca Agreement Treaty Organization. And it is designed to protect Saudi Arabia as the land of the two holy shrines, right? And it brings Saudi Arabia formally under the nuclear umbrella of Pakistan. It brings Saudi Arabia the defensive massive forces of one of the largest Muslim militaries in the world, which is Turkey's. So by doing this, it also shows that the Middle East, the Muslim world, no longer trusts the United States, and that our defensive alliances, which have been shown to be pretty clear, is the U.S. and Israel against everybody else. No one can trust that anymore. Therefore, they have now shifted this this new Mecca Alliance Treaty Organization has shifted the balance of power. And I think Trump, if he knew about it or had advanced knowledge of it, probably thought, awesome, now they're going to fight the Houthis for us. It's not what this organization's for.
Let's break this down a little bit more, because I did a video on it. It was very popular. It's one of the first pieces I wrote. Again, if you're watching on Substack, you can actually read my thoughts on it if you want. First piece I've written in a while. But I'm really interested in this because Saudi Arabia does not have the most capable military. Let's be honest. But it is the economic powerhouse. But it has concerns over the sustainability of its economics, right? Vision 2030 is an attempt to diversify away from oil and gas and stuff like that, whether you believe in it. But so that's the financial hub. Turkey seems to be the military defensive capability here, right? It's got a very impressive 480,000 personnel, loads of tanks.
Standing army, right?
Yeah, standing. And then you've got the Pakistanis, which is they're the nuclear umbrella, but they also have ISI and the intelligence arm here. So these three do seem to complement each other quite well. However, to be counter, argument for a minute, how likely are they actually going to come to each other's aid? How well is this MATO, as you call it, going to really function in reality? Because I think a lot of people have said it's a lot of talk, but not necessarily much change. Because
if you look at it honestly, it creates essentially this defensive network, which to be fair, once again, it was designed to protect Saudi Arabia from external attack. And what I call it, honestly, and I don't know if Trump has glommed onto this, I call it the anti Abraham Accords.
Yeah.
It's a
It's a
sign
countdown.
that there will never be, these nation states no longer need to sign a treaty with Israel about nothing. And on the other hand, it's a pretty underhanded way because, again, I think the Trump people will probably pitch this that this was to designed to protect Saudi Arabia against missile attacks by Yemen. And the US was probably like, yeah, awesome. Turkey, Pakistan, you guys can all go and invade northern Yemen and clear out the Houthi landia. But in fact, it's really an alliance against Israel. It's formalized the Muslim world against Israel. And let me tell you, you bring in the Egyptian army, which is also massive, has enormous quantity of very advanced Western tanks and equipment, fighter jets. Now you've got every major Muslim army on your side, including one that's got 100 nukes, right? So there's no reason to ever sign the Abraham Accords. And this means that the United States has gone from being the principal protector and sales agent of weapons and equipment in the Muslim world, starting around the Arabian Peninsula, and it's been flipped on its head. We decided to align ourselves with Israel 100% in the Iran war, and Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Pakistan, and all the other Gulf states will eventually join, have aligned themselves to one, bring themselves in defensive alignment against Iran without any question. But no bullshit. They are looking at Israel, right?
Yeah, you
Israel
said
has
no, no.
proven
I
themselves as the regional bully now.
100. No, look, everything you've just said is what I've thought from the very beginning. It is I think the icing on the cake, though, Malcolm, is this is Trump's doing partially, isn't it?
Yeah.
His crowning achievement he wanted to, because in the face of it, a lot of people was like objected. It was quite impressive, the Abraham Accords. Maybe you think it was complete bollocks, but like he wanted to pin the tail on the donkey or whatever by getting Saudi Arabia to join up to this, and by undertaking this war with Iran and all this shift from US security assurances and guarantor to absolute destabilizer and almost giving the green light to Israel to do even more. He's completely shot himself in both feet, or in the face, frankly. It's a complete rejection, I think, the Mecca Agreement, NATO, of US security. And it's a complete opposition to Israel. Israel is seen as the de facto destabilizing force in the Middle East now, right? I saw a comment earlier. They're saying Israel sort of doing the Russia, right? It's sort of under Netanyahu. They are seen as the regional or whatever neighboring state that wants to interfere, deliberately destabilize in other countries' sovereignty and interests. And it's insane because all Iran has to do is just sort of be like, well, we're defending ourselves against America, but we don't want to, we're attacking your bases, right? I think Iran's done a very clever strategy of proportionality, right? So whenever America strikes targets within Iran, Iran's like, okay, we'll target American bases in the countries, but we don't want to target the sovereign nations themselves, right? Maybe you disagree with that nuance, but I just don't.
But this goes back to my analogy about the camel souk. All right, I mean, I've lived in the Muslim world, lived and worked in the Muslim world for 40 years. Okay, I am not joking when I make this analogy. What it means is they all have camels, right? They all know the characteristics of the camel. They know what a good-looking camel is. They know what a bad camel is. They sell back and forth to each other. They fight over the sale of these camels, right? But they know their trade. So when they talk to the Iranians, they know what the Iranians are thinking. The Iranians know what they're thinking. They have a mutual respect for how they're going to talk to each other. Yes, there's going to be a lot of camel trading, but in the end, somebody's going to have an advantage here, right? But when the West stepped in to this world and started demanding things of Iran, right, stepped into the camel souk and wanted to buy camels, Iran, with the MOU, delivered this. They didn't deliver camels. They delivered a donkey with the word camel written on the side in paint, right? That is what happens when you come into somebody else's game. You're going to get, as Rudyard Kipling put it, right? An epitaph drear, a fool lies here who tried to hustle the East. And the United States tried this. And what has it done? It has ended American power in the Persian Gulf. It has ended the Gulf states' dependence on the United States because their interceptors are all that was really working for them. But now their nation, they almost lost their entire energy industry because of the United States. And that war was fought between Israel and the United States and Iran. It wasn't Desert Storm, right, where we got 30 countries to contribute forces and had them in a coalition, right, for one mission to expel Iraq from Kuwait. And when done, it was done. Nope, we didn't do any of that. So again, we've stepped into a camel soup and, and essentially told them to deal with us on our terms. And what do we get? We got a freaking donkey with the word camel written on the side. But the other players, they all know how Iran thinks. They can cut deals with them. They know this, all the money going to the Gulf states, going to Iran in that $300 billion deal. They are carrying out a policy that I recommended early on. Buy them. Buy Iran's future. Make it so that all that excess stuff that you get from Carrefour, you can sell in the Iranian market. And over time, a good environment will overthrow that Islamic extremist government. It'll take years, but look at us. We literally upset the apple cart. And now the Gulf states are going to defend themselves. The Saudis look to Pakistan and Turkey.
How big do you think NATO could get, do you think? Because the articles have said it's pretty open to anyone to join. I'm pretty sure Egypt will join.
Yeah, the United States is not going to join, but yeah, everyone's going to join NATO because NATO's mandate was to protect the kingdom of the two holy shrines of the Grand Mosque in Mecca and the mosque in the land of Medina, which is where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, emigrated. And that's it. And by the way, that's where he's buried, is in Medina. So, and then on the other hand, there's the whole Jerusalem thing. So by having a unified defensive alliance, you're putting the Israelis on notice that you're surrounded and we are not signing the Abraham Accords. You can keep the UAE, you can keep Bahrain, and you can keep Morocco. But I wouldn't be surprised if Morocco comes and joins NATO and Algeria, and it becomes a bad military version of the Arab League. But don't forget the underlying premise here is that if Saudi Arabia is attacked, all of you will come to our aid. If the land of the two holy shrines is attacked, Saudi Arabia will come to our aid. But they do not mean, in essence, that this isn't oriented towards Iran. It's oriented towards Israel.
How likely is an attack, though?
By who? The Israelis?
Well, Jesus. On Saudi Arabia?
On Saudi Arabia? I don't know. Ben Gvir, Smitrovic, and Katz and Netanyahu all sound insane these days. They really do. They're acting
the greater Israeli
out of
project,
all norms.
It absorbs quite a lot of Saudi land if you look at a greater Israel map, I guess hypothetically. But there is just to pivot this a little bit, one of the last questions I wanted, because we've been talking for a while. I mean, I could keep going, but I know you must have a life outside of YouTube.
I got work to do.
Of course. What? You're working. You're working, right? One of the last questions I have for you then, mate, is simply, this isn't just about the existing balance of power in the Middle East. It's also about, I think, broader Southern Asia. and specifically I'm thinking of the ITU2, right? That's India
Mhm.
and Israel, UAE, and the US. Now, this is a minilateral group, a regional security arrangement
Right.
that
I
not
like
many
that.
people know about. But I think it's very potentially relevant here, because if Pakistan starts flexing more, that's going to antagonize New Delhi. It's going to antagonize the Modi government, and I worry about this whole thing spilling out even further than it has already. Especially because if you remember last year, there was that whole, you talked about a Silk Road. Well, the Indians have been very keen on this broader sort of new Silk Road that goes through Iran, it goes through
Right.
Israel, all the way up to southern Europe.
Mhm.
And that's become hugely impeded by this war with Iran. Do you have any
Mhm.
feeling that that could become a theater, a bigger, even bigger theater, or is it too
A
speculative?
flashpoint? No, I don't think that I don't think that it's going to have any impact on the region at all. Uh,
I don't think India.
Not India. India has two challenges in this world. One, sustain its borders from Chinese encroachment, and two, face off with nukes to Pakistan, mutual assured destruction. So, I mean, an India-Pakistan war could literally kill 500 million people, right? Uh, I think that is their entire sense of being, which I always find fascinating when you consider that Pakistan, there are more Muslims in India, right, that are than there are Pakistanis. Okay, as you all know, Pakistan came to being during the great separation, and all the Muslims who went east are Bangladeshi, are called Bangladesh, and all the Muslims that went west are in Pakistan. But there's still 90 million Muslims in India. So, what exactly would the flashpoint be around? Jammu and Kashmir, which is in the insurgency that's still going on up there, which is the Lake District. I have been dying to get to Jammu and Kashmir my whole life because I hear it's very pretty up there. But it's also where, the best chance of Indian and Pakistani forces coming to blows. But it's going to be a political decision, right? The skirmish that happened, what was it, a year ago, wasn't really an
Yeah.
air and artillery skirmish. It was not them mobilizing the entire Pakistani army, the entire Indian army, and then nuking each other, right? Because that's the only effect, right? These two nuclear powers facing each other. India is not going to get involved with the UAE and Israel on any other scale other than, as you put it, a micro regional organization that is looking out for their economic interests because India is a billion people. That's a billion buyers into your market.
I
So,
appreciate that, but I also feel like, what was the ITU to set up to do? It's about securing maritime naval passages, and
yeah.
if Pakistan's going to be, I don't know, active for whatever reason, and this conflict continues to impede Indian interests, which it has, fertilizer and all this sort of shit has really hit India hard.
Yeah, but
Again, I'm not.
you
I'm,
could thank the United States for that. You could thank the United States for that. America did all of this. None of this would be a discussion if we hadn't attacked that country, right?
really, oh,
So
well,
I don't care what the Indians think they want and can do. That little alliance means nothing in the big scheme of things. It means nothing. They don't have the geography. Pakistan has the geography. They don't have the navy to challenge the Indians, but in the 60s, they did sink an Indian destroyer with a submarine, with an ancient ass World War II submarine. So things happen. The point is not to create another axis that would act as a flint to have another flashpoint in that region. The big players have assembled now. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt is coming on board. And I'm going to tell you, by the way, if you guys ever want to do a show, I'm going to tell you where the next bit of fuckery is going to come from, and you will not like it. A lot of people won't like it, but I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump himself works
well,
with Netanyahu to sharpen that knife, and that is to overthrow the kingdom of Jordan and make it Palestine and force march everybody to the east?
Seriously, I've been thinking about this.
I've been thinking about it since I was 10. You know, the
Really?
first
Oh,
terrorist act I ever saw. The first terrorist act I ever saw was I had to have been younger than 10. 61, I had to have been 7 or 8. Was the skyjacking of the 4 airliners to what was called then Dawson Field, which we now call Queen Aliyah International Airport outside of Amman, by the PLO. And then they blew up all 4 airliners after inviting the press there. That's back when people thought the Palestinians, which now are the majority of people in Jordan, thought they were going to take it over with their Black September terrorist group, which was a Palestinian terrorist group designed to overthrow the Kingdom of Jordan so that they could fight a direct war with Israel. The freaking 70s are coming back to us. The only problem I have now, this could be a plot by the United States government and the Mossad in order to ethnically cleanse 2.2 million people out of Gaza and to clear the West Bank.
yeah, but from what I recall when I was focusing on the Gaza Strip and things, was a lot of Jordanians, even though a lot of Palestinians do come from Transjordan, a lot of Jordanians do not identify with Palestinians anymore, and there's been that concerted effort by all surrounding Muslim states to reject any idea of hosting refugees, asylum seekers. So why would that work?
Yes. And that has been said since the founding of Israel, right? Everybody says the same thing. We don't want that smoke, right? We don't want the Palestinians having this whole land up there. The problem is we've got 2 administrations that think they're the fucking masters of the universe, right? And as far as they're concerned, Sykes-Picot was awesome. Dividing up the Middle East. Why can we not go back to 1917 and eliminate Transjordan, right? Which used to be called Palestine or Palestinian Transjordan, and remove that population back to, by the way, Jordan is a completely fictional place that was, it's a real country. I've been there, love Jordan, right? Love Amman, but it was given to the Hashemite tribes by the British, given. And they have been installed and kept in power all of that time. And yes, Jordanians are Jordanians. They are a sovereign nation. They have a right to exist. But you can't tell me the way that the Israelis are operating these days. And, you know, I'm an ally of Israel, not an ally of the Israeli government. They're the most extremist, and they could get more extreme. And one of those extreme plans could be, we could clear the West Bank.
No, look,
Right?
as I say, I think it's very feasible. I wouldn't sign anything off from the Israeli government, especially as the elections come up. The guy, the former chief of staff, I think it was, who his
Mhm.
party is leading in the polls by 1 or 2 percentage points.
Mhm.
He could become the prime minister. But I always remember that idea that they wanted to force all the Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip and just into the peninsula, the Sinai, right? And then they're there, and then it's Egypt's problem, and Israel can just absorb the rest of the territories that exist
In
around it.
case you wonder why the Egyptians built 7 fences between Gaza and their and their side of the border. They know what the Israelis are up to. They don't want those Palestinians walking over there. They can't. So, you know, all I'm saying is that the universe is so crazy right now. Stupid, crazy ideas that sound like they come from a Tom Clancy novel are actually being affected as foreign policy in Israel and the United States, like a
Wow.
war with Turkey. Whoever thought that the Israelis would threaten northern Cyprus and Turkish forces there as a way to not trigger NATO Article 5? You just had Ben Gvir do that the other day.
Wow, that's quite clever. Um, that's quite conniving. What do you think happens next then? You know, the Overton window has moved, as you say. It's completely blown open. So what happens next? What do you think we should look out for most of all? And next time we talk, hopefully soon, you know,
To tell you the truth, the outlier that suddenly popped up set Iran aside. Iran's won this war. Iran's going to get everything they want. They're going to go back to the MOU. most likely after the election, and the Strait of Hormuz will open under Iranian control. U.S. Navy will never be allowed back into the Persian Gulf unless we intend to fight our way in and then sit there while they bombard us so that we can go to, Pancho Villas in Dubai and have
That
margaritas.
seems like a slow burn, right? That's not going to
That's
change overnight.
It's
Or you
not going to
think
change. The
so
big
what's
outlier
this
that I think all of you should look at is Libya. Libya
Libya?
now, the United States has, well, first off, in the great revolution of 2011, NATO supported the overthrow of Gaddafi because of Gaddafi's famous speech where he said he's going to hunt down all of his opponents in their house, street, alley. So when that was done, in full disclosure, I was there in 2011. The United Arab Emirates threw its lot in with Egypt and Russia, and now they occupy everything west of Sirte to the Egyptian border. The United Arab Emirates is training Janjaweed forces in southeastern Libya and Kufra at the Kufra Oasis. And they just gave Russia 6 air bases in
Oh
Libya.
wow! So the Russians really
Mhm.
have shifted from Syria to Libya.
Russia, United Arab Emirates, and the Egyptians are now the factor that wasn't allowing them to succeed in taking the whole country was the United States. Well, last week, 2 weeks ago, Marco Rubio invited the son of the de facto leader of the Libyan National Army, who's Khalifa Haftar. I have a history with Khalifa Haftar,
Oh boy!
and in Chad, and invited his son, who is now the de facto leader of that alliance, Saddam Haftar, that's his name, to Washington, and they met. And the United States looks like it is going to side with the Emirati Russian Egyptian alliance, not the Turkish backed alliance that's recognized in Tripoli.
So this is going to
Oh, by the
become.
way, Libya just started to announce that they're starting to export oil to Europe.
So what? So they're cutting off the United States, but trying to keep Europe on side whilst deepening relations with Russia. What's going on?
The other way around. The United States is going to back the Libyan National Army, which now occupies most of the major oil fields
Oh, I
in
see.
Libya, right? And they remember what I said about Trump was going to seize control of all the natural resources of oil in the world? This is another one. Oh, and miraculously, 4 drones hit the only major refinery, the Zawiya refinery, the largest refinery, a week ago, out of nowhere. Which now means that energy is going to flow wherever the United States, the United Arab Emirates, and Russia decides it's going to flow.
But how does that work with Russia and the US in the context of Ukraine? If they're
What are you
divvying up,
talking about? Well, the United States isn't giving any weapons to Ukraine. What does that matter? Right? We cut off defense aid a year ago. We are allowing people to sell things to Ukraine, but Donald Trump is a wholly owned asset of Moscow. I wrote 3 New York Times bestsellers about this. Right? I mean, the guy works for Putin. He's in love with him. So this works out for him. I think Trump has this fantasy in his head, and if we're lucky, a hamburger will resolve this issue through closing his arteries. And I think he thinks he's going to rule the world and rule the world's oil resources. And Iran has proved him wrong. But he's making these alliances that now are seizing countries. And he's pulling levers like he's in a Tom Clancy novel. The whole Ceuta siege by the Moroccans was done by, with the belief that it was done with Moroccan intelligence or Moroccan government acquiescence to punish Spain for not backing Trump on the Iran war. To the point where Trump is talking about pulling the 2 U.S. bases out of Spain, Marone and Rota. I lived in Rota for 8 years. This is crazy. It would literally cut U.S. naval power into the Mediterranean, cut it off. We have 3 forward deployed ships there. Trump doesn't care. He's pulling these levers. He's going to reward the only guy that signed the Abraham Accords with, what was, used to be called Spanish Morocco. And now the Israelis have agitated to say that the Moroccans should seize Ceuta and Melilla, the two territories that have been run by the Spanish for centuries. All of this is looking too neat, and it's all surrounding the movement of oil. And Trump seems to think that he has control of this. So now the United States is siding with Saddam Haftar to essentially take control of Libya.
Okay, wow, that's something everyone to definitely keep a lookout on. I'm going to go away and read into that, Malcolm. Very interesting.
Yeah, it ain't positive. It ain't positive.
Well, what is in this world? But Malcolm Nance, everyone, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Everyone watching, of course, do go and check out Malcolm's books. Do check out his Substack. Check out my YouTube if you want. And we'll be back very soon. And have a good rest of your week. Malcolm, thanks so much.